So welcome to Ideas of Beers, weekly active travel forum. If you haven't picked up already, we are going to be changing our name, but no hurry on that score. We've got a few names, suggestions, lots of ideas for alternatives. Active Travel Network, Active Travel Ideas, Active Travel Chat. Do feel free to keep posting those ideas. We have been making a couple of changes to the format, so tonight we'll carry on with that. So nothing too drastic, but we will have open with our news section, which we'll ask Bob to kick us off with his highlights, his 3 highlights. And then if anyone's got any news to share, then please do so. And we will aim to finish by 6:15 at the latest, and maybe earlier tonight or not. We are tonight focusing on travel to school in our speaker slot. So we've got Jenny Babey and Ali Stansfield from Sustrans going to talk about a multitude of school street schemes. And then we're also delighted that we've got Cheryl Lyddon from Modeshift, which is one of the key organisations leading on active travel plans in schools and other projects. And they've just got a big load of funding from the government to extend that work. And as ever, you know, we will have time for questions and discussion around all of that. So if that is all and we feel we're ready to go, then I think we'll move into the news section and ask Bob to kick us off.
Yeah, I keep on referring to Ukraine, and there's another scheme to get bikes to Ukraine. Okay, and you've seen that before. Right, so changing to the new format, here are my 3 issues. I did mention this last time. There's been a self-assessment form for local authorities that came out from Active Travel England. I don't know if anybody wants to say anything about funding, where we are with Active Travel England. Incidentally, there are various jobs going at ATE, which you can see on Twitter. Do go and have a look at them. They will look interesting. And it's still taking a lot of time, bearing in mind it was announced in May 2020, but better late than never. If anybody wants to say anything about funding, Simon Monks said something about funding LIPs in local implementation plans in London. If he wants to say anything at the end of this, we can do that. So there's the thing about funding. Okay, so 2 things I want to talk about that happened this week left. Exceptional hardship defence. And this happened with this gentleman, Duke of Norfolk, and you can read about it there in the Independent. Actually, it's a misleading title because he says he was banned from driving after using the phone at the wheel. What happened is he was found by police to have gone through a red light when he was on the phone, got 6 points, and he'd already got a number of points for speeding. And he sort of dug himself in deeper, saying that he might need his car at 4 AM to get out to see the curlew or lapwing. And so there's a lot of stuff about the exceptional hardship defence, which you've heard people like Technical Chief Superintendent Andy Cox talk about. And his argument was that he would need to be able to drive in order to organise the coronation. And a lot of us pointed out this is basically taking the piss, but the whole exceptional hardship defence is something of a get out for people to excuse bad driving and avoid quite small penalties. And so it is being questioned. I've argued that it should only be used very rarely. Andy Cox has said it should never be used. Look at his Twitter thread on that. And you see a lot of discussion about that. So exceptional hardship. Right, so the one last item I want to talk about is this, and it's just a quote from Professor Gillian Annable, whose work you should know of on decarbonisation from CREDS and ITS Leeds, work for Foundation for Integrated Transport. And this is a quote from a BBC Radio 4 programme on net zero and road transport. And I'm just going to read this out to you because it's tremendously important for active travel. And here we go. The evidence says loud and clear that we can improve the alternatives for the car until the cows come home. But if we don't at the same time place some restrictions on using the car, then it won't make a lot of difference to car use. So I leave you with that. If anybody wants to say anything about funding, ask Claire if she'll allow you. And that's it.
Thanks, Bob. Yeah, there were quite a lot of those active travel jobs put out over the last day. Mark, would you like to come in?
Thanks. So I had a chat with somebody whose name I can't mention, but is very dear to this parish, about various things that have been happening. And some of the self-assessment, I'm talking about the self-assessment results. And some councils, I think Adam's on there, Adam Reynolds, some councils have made their public views known, some have been quiet. Quite a few put themselves down as a 2 and got knocked back down to a 1, or a 3 and got knocked back down to a 2. So I understand that there are one council didn't respond, there are some 3s, but we don't know who they are, and that apparently that will be made public. And at least one council was a 0, which I think is Worcestershire, and actually put a press release out on the on their own website saying they said they were a 1 and they got put back down to a 0, which is very brave of them. Somebody said to me that maybe they misunderstood the scoring and thought that that was the best score, but it was very odd that they actually press released that. So that's where we are with the funding and the self-assessment scores. The other thing I wanted to point out, which Bob didn't do, is that we have certainly, I put in the chat, we have certainly lost a dedicated active travel minister. So Active Travel England took Trudy Harrison around Europe this summer, and she went to Utrecht apparently and spent time saying how wonderful everything was. And in the reshuffle, there is now officially, if you look down the list of roles at the DFT, there is no one who has active travel listed explicitly as their remit. Apparently, it may be Charlotte Veer, who is not necessarily an enemy, but is not necessarily a friend of active travel, and is in the House of Lords, so can't speak up as strongly as a parliamentary, as a Commons minister. But she's just down as local transport generally, so it's not explicitly their role.
Yeah. Can I just say, my understanding is that it is Baroness Veer.
Yeah,
right.
That's Adam Kaufman's take as well.
Yeah,
but she's not. Yeah, she's not as assiduous or as as keen as some of the previous ones.
Thanks, Mark. I'll bring in Simon now.
Yeah, I was just going to say 2 things very quickly. One was, if folks haven't read it, the report from Carlton Reid from Forbes of Andrew Gilligan tearing Andy Burnham to pieces today is well worth a read around Manchester and clean air zones. Manchester's not my bailiwick, obviously, so someone else can kind of fill it in, I suspect. What I was going to say was we're hearing that London boroughs have finally had what's called their LIP, or Local Implementation Plan, allocations today. Now, this is basically the 80 million for active travel that London has got from its funding settlement is now being dispersed to boroughs. And I think it was worth just pointing out that there's been quite a lot on social media about how terrible 80 million settlement is and how far down it is from the golden days, as it were. But actually, the reality is that there was a massive underspend that Sian Berry and Caroline Russell and the Greens in the London Assembly kind of exposed. So TfL has never spent massively more than 80 million ever in a year. So if it spends 80 million in the next year, we'll actually be doing all right, as it were, for London. So I'm quite kind of quietly optimistic, but we're already hearing from boroughs in London who are saying, how come we've got this much? This is the wrong amount. How come they've got that much, etc. So there's going to be a bit of a bun fight as this all comes out. Well, I've heard of one borough that shouldn't be getting any funding that's got quite a lot of funding, so I'm going to be trying to get to the bottom of that one as quickly as I can. But yeah, that's that bit, I think. And the only other thing I was going to say was, yes, Andy Byford, Ruth put in the chat, Andy Byford's leaving TfL to go back to America, the commissioner of TfL, and we don't quite know exactly what the long-term shape of TfL is on that basis, but the new head of roads transport at the moment is pretty interesting and good. So we're going to get having good talks at the moment with TfL. So yeah, fingers crossed as ever.
Thanks, Simon. Beth.
Sorry, can't find the mute button. I just thought I'd offer up, if you like, a little bit of information about upcoming bids and funding, if people are interested. I was at an Active Travel England briefing the other day. Well, firstly, on the self-assessments, I believe that they're imminently going to publish the list of local authorities and their assessed levels. So I don't know what all the different ones are, but what I will say is that the majority of them got level 1. And then the next most common level was level 2, and only 5 local authorities got level 3. So yeah, most are level 1 or 2. And they, yeah, like I say, they're going to, sorry, I'm just looking back at my notes, they're going to publish the moderated levels alongside the publication of the final allocations for the Capability and Ambition Fund, which is likely to be October or November. So the Capability and Ambition Fund is like the follow-on from the Capability Fund, which was last year, which is revenue funding. The bids for that need to be in by end of this week. And so that's for the current financial year of revenue funding, but obviously because we're already halfway through the financial year, will be by the time we get the money, they're allowing 12 months of expenditure. Imminently, they're also going to launch the next bidding round for what's being called ATF4, which is revenue and capital funding. And that will be a multi-year thing, I believe. I haven't seen the guidance yet, but that will be for 2 years of revenue funding and 3 years of capital funding. And the deadline for that is Christmas, apparently. So lots and lots of bidding going on.
Exceptionally useful. Thank you for all those contributions.
Hope I haven't told you anything I wasn't supposed to tell you.
Well, we're all friends here. Leo.
I don't know, are we in the news bit?
We're on the news bit, and we were just talking about national stuff and focused on Active Travel England, but if there's no other stuff regarding that, feel free to move us into new territory.
Just looking. Okay, so just 2 things. One's very opposite to today's topic because possible I've just done an interactive school street mapper. It's not for the whole country. It was an awful lot of work, but it is Leeds, Birmingham, Bristol and London. I've stuck it in the chat window, and it's just got all the schools in each city in it, and they're blue if they've got a school street, and they're red if they haven't, and you can just click straight through and email the local councillors for that ward. So hopefully that's useful. And then we've got something quite similar for parklets as well, which is actually very, very satisfying. You can decide where you want to put a parklet, exactly where you want to put it, and then follow through with an email to councillor saying I'd like to put a parklet here. So it's they're both quite satisfying and hopefully useful. That is all I wanted to report. Great.
Thanks, Leo. Is anyone? Bev's asked about the Gilligan comments. Is anyone else here from Greater Manchester want to comment on that?
Oh, I can, Claire.
Yeah, you go, Steve. Nice to have you back.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, sorry, I was just busy trying to undo my video and stuff. No, definitely on the I just had a quick scan of the article after you mentioned it, Simon. And it's really interesting. I think the only thing I'd say, and I've said this very publicly in Greater Manchester, is the clean air zone that was proposed for here was daft. It in fact, in particular, because of its narrowness of focus, in particular, it totally didn't address decarbonisation of transport and would have left us you know, having to have exactly the same conversation in just a few years' time with people who'd opted for Euro 6 vans and stuff. So it was just a bad scheme for Greater Manchester, regardless of whether you think it was cowardice on the clean air front. I've said that we need a really fresh and more ambitious plan than the one that we had on the table earlier this year, actually. So in some ways, I think we dodged a bullet. Whether there is the political ambition and drive to make something more ambitious come to light, you know, that's what I think we should be aiming for.
Thanks, Steve. And question in the chat, Steve from Wookie saying daft because it was so small. And I think obviously it was the other problem, wasn't it? Do you want to just pick up on that point? Why was it daft? I think Steve might be struggling to hear yet, but yes, basically.
Sorry, no, was that Claire? Sorry, I missed that.
Just saying, a couple of questions in the chat about why was it daft, perhaps not as across kind of what the proposal was. I mean, ultimately it was because it was proposed as a huge GM-wide scheme.
Yeah, yeah, it involved. It did mean quite literally that you could be doing some sort of trip from rural outskirts of Bolton to rural outskirts of Wigan. And you'd be covered by the clean air zone, and yet it didn't have the teeth to tackle all pollutants, such as particulates, in the really dense urban centres and actually start to take cars off the roads. It didn't include private car use, which I always thought was absolutely bonkers as well. So it was a flawed scheme from my view, from my perspective, both because of its ridiculous scale, but also because it was dodging having any kind of war with car drivers, which is a legacy. I don't mind saying this, is a legacy of Andy's slightly, I think, rash commitment to never see any kind of congestion charge in Greater Manchester.
Yeah, and I think the other thing about that was that what we've seen elsewhere is that actually there is appetite for clean air type schemes in sort of urban centres, and so GM clean air zone just didn't have kind of that legitimacy. It was too all-encompassing, whereas there are parts of GM like Manchester City Centre where I think it would potentially be not that controversial to do, so it kind of fell between all the stalls. I'll bring in Mark. Sorry, Sally.
I can't put my hand up because
you've got a real hand.
I'm just going to add to that. I think because in Newcastle next year, I think we see they will bring it in for buses, heavy goods vehicles, I think taxis, not private cars. And again, like, it's not what they wanted to deliver anyway, but my understanding is that the government was very reluctant to fund a lot of what local authorities wanted to do. So I think there is again that issue of how who's going to pay for all of this infrastructure to go in, and is there parity between other cities and London in terms of those kind of what's available to spend on this kind of infrastructure.
Thanks, Sally. Right, we'd best move on from clean air, or unless Mark wants to comment on that, and then we'll go to Ruth. Yes, Mark.
Yeah, no, I don't really have much to add. Yeah, but I would agree that it did seem to be, it went off at half cock. It displeased a lot of people. A lot of people were confused about, if you like, the extent and what it meant and things like that, to the extent that some people thought it was actually Andy Burnham's idea when it was actually something that was put forward by central Conservative government and also the schedule on which it was originally supposed to be happening as well, which was, it was a mess from start to finish, I think. And there was a lot of opposition to it in certain areas. For example, around Levenshulme, where I used to live, you know, people were really upset about it, and largely on the basis of not really knowing what it involved and things like that as well. So there was something went really wrong there. So that's the end of my comments there. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. And Ruth.
Hi. So this is something that I've wanted to say for quite a long time, and as we're a mixture of people, councillors, officers, campaigners, professionals. it's often spoken about make friends with your councillors or make friends with your officers. My experience of Hounslow is we are very, very good friends with our councillors. We have some really top councillors who cycle and who really see and understand all the issues. But the transport team, especially the recent transport team for the last 2 to 3 years, have been at arm's length. So one of the problems you have is they may get the funding and then they implement something, and we're told not to criticise because it's not helpful. But then they implement something which we know, those of us who already cycle, is either dangerous, not fit for purpose, won't be used, blah, blah, blah. And, you know, today, for example, I've just cycled to and fro in pouring rain, and half my journey was perfect and protected and safe, and the other half was utterly hideous because of failures. And I suppose my plea is that it shouldn't really be that we always have to work through our councillors, because if you get councillors who aren't on side, like my 9 Chiswick councillors, none of whom want safe cycling, I'm totally disenfranchised. But I'm lucky that the higher ups in the council, Hounslow Council are pro. But we can't get to the officers, so we can never say, by the way, that junction simply doesn't work. And TfL are about to do some new work in Chiswick with Hounslow Council, and one of the things they're going to do is still not going to work. So they do need to listen to the voice of those of us on the ground, and we do need to be able to be critical, supportive, but you have to be critical if your life is at risk, and that is one of the problems that we have. Thank you.
Thanks, Ruth. I'm going to give us another 4 minutes for the news section before we move into the speaker bit. So that means we've got Robin and Adam. So maybe bear that in mind. We haven't got long left.
Yeah. So I'm just interested to compare this with the Oxford and Oxfordshire, where the county council has a bold plan in many ways, but then it falls short at the last bit. So there's a bold strategy for Oxford and the surrounding area, which involves traffic filters, 6 strategic traffic filters, which would divide the city into segments. I'll come back to those in a minute. A zero emissions zone, and with a fee for entering it, and a workplace parking levy. But those traffic filters have, in the version proposed, and this is in consultation at the moment, for residents of the city would have 100 permits per year per person if you're a resident of the city. So that's a huge number of permits, and if you've got 2 people in a household, that's 200. You can pretty much carry on as normal. So obviously our response to the consultation is you want to bring the numbers down. The officers, I think, are worried that about spillover onto the ring road and so forth, and this is an area twice the size of the one done in Ghent, but Ghent was bigger than Groningen and so forth, so the battle goes on. That's all I'll say because we haven't got long.
So just that clean air zone is going ahead, Robin, right? Or is it still in it might go ahead mode? The
consultation is going ahead. Obviously, I mean, I can't prejudge the decision because it's not mine to make. My bet, if I had to put a bet on it, is it will go ahead. It will be, it will have obviously some kinds of permits and exemptions. But the thing is, Oxford, the traffic gets pinched in the middle, so the congestion has just been building up, and buses are basically averaging 8 to 10 miles an hour. So they have to do something to free up the buses, and they have to do something of this nature. Otherwise, the whole thing just grinds to a halt, as it has been doing regularly. I mean, the clue is in the name, Oxford. There is not a lot of, the city was not designed. Cambridge at least has a bridge.
So we'll watch this space. Adam.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that when it comes to the politicians and engaging with the politicians, when you start looking at, say, the Cabinet Minister for Transport, they're likely to be there for about 2 years before they get swapped out at the next cabinet reshuffle. So you end up with these kind of conversations which kind of go get quite positive, and then they die off, and then the next person comes in and you spend 6 months trying to get them on board. then it gets quite positive, etc. So one of the things that in Baines, particularly in Bath and North East Somerset, we used to have the cycle forum, which then became the active travel and accessibility forum. The current administration then shut that down because we were getting quite vocal about saying, look, you need to deliver things to LTM 120. They've now set up what's known as the Journey to Net Zero forum, which is, but the critical point is we're trying to engage with officers. We, for example, the Keys Bridge, which is going in, we got it from the Cycle City Ambition grant funding that came in 2015, and it's about to be delivered next year. That's 6 cabinet ministers for transport we've gone through, but we still are talking to the same officers. Yeah, so it's the officer core that's really critical in a lot of this, and that conversation, getting that conversation, that consistent conversation between officers that goes over years and years and years is a really critical point. And this idea that we always need to engage through the politicians, a lot of the times they're there for 2 years and then they move on. You know, there are, Clive Lokes is probably the exception to rule. There are probably others, but the critical point here is that engagement at a community level with access to officers, which are usually there for 10, 15 years, is significantly important in trying to get this kind of progress. To a certain extent, politicians, they come and go.
Yes, it was interesting when we heard from Wasim Zafar in Birmingham, who subsequently got deselected, but that they'd changed their electoral cycle in order to help them bring in more policies. Right, it's been a really great section, but I think we're going to move into the speakers now. And
just before we do that, can I just do a really quick for the record stats for the critical mass, like less than...
Oh, we did promise we'd do that because they promoted it last week. Yes.
So it was International Critical Mass Weekend at the weekend again. We had rides on Saturday and Sunday throughout the UK, including in Bournemouth, Barry, Bath, Birmingham, Bournemouth, Derby, Dundee, Edinburgh, Exeter, Leamington Spa, Newcastle, North Tyneside, Norwich, Portsmouth, Reading and Wokingham and York, and no doubt others. And there were in total around 1,300 people who participated. So that's really great.
Thanks, Sally. And yes, Simon did just want to come back in for one final point, so we'll give Simon the last word.
So yeah, I was just going to say, critical friend campaigning, it's a really difficult art form to get right. It's not an easy thing, there are going to be times when you need to be critical. There's going to be times when you need to be friends. You're all experts in your local areas, etc. See my earlier webinar. But what I was going to say on this stuff is yes, it's really important to cultivate relationships with officers, particularly some of the planners and the folks who write the long-term reports. But the person that signs the checks off is the current cabinet lead, the current leader of your council, etc. If you do not get them on board, doesn't matter how good your officers are, they won't sign the money off. You're stuffed. So you kind of have to put them first. Even if they only last 2 years, you still want to reach them quickly, get them moving, get them signing off stuff, getting them delivered, and then actually they're leaving a legacy for the next person behind them, as it were. Whereas if they sit on schemes for months on end, if they don't sign the checks, then you're still stuffed regardless of how good your officers and your plans and your things are.
Thanks, Simon. So much to discuss, and Active Travel England remains a very interesting, evolving topic. So thanks for all the insight on that. Right, I'm going to ask Jenny Babey from Sustrans to kick us off into the speaker section, where we're going to focus on travel to school. And Jenny, over to you.
Thank you. So hi, if you don't know me, I'm Jenny Babey. I have a long title, which means I oversee school streets area of work at Sustrans. So I used to be a schools officer in Southampton, where I'm based, and I myself have delivered many school streets in Southampton, helping to launch it to where it is today. I think they've got 19 now on the go, 2 of which are permanent, and one is one of my projects that I worked on. So just as an overview of Sustrans school streets, we've been doing it for a few years now. The real big launch that we had, the real big propeller to where we are today, is back in 2019. We did our Big Pedal annual event, and we ran 40 school streets, 4 of which were in Southampton, which I ran. And that really gave us a big wealth of knowledge and experience to kind of help us further school streets to where they are today. And that experience that we've got now kind of ranges the whole spectrum from organising and delivery straight through to designing engineering to create permanency. And we've been working with over 80 authorities now at all kinds of different levels, from just doing advice all the way through to kind of running projects and doing behaviour change within the school. There is no one size fits all. They all look very different. Top left is actually in Paris. I happened to come across it whilst there, but I know there is one in Brighton, maybe two in Brighton, that use gates similar to that, but we have kind of helped to deliver and support different kinds of permanency, from signage and bollards to barriers, stewards. We've had paid stewards, volunteer stewards, all sorts. So yeah, it does range experience. What I'm just going to talk about is some research that we did. It was filling a gap. We were funded through the Road Safety Trust to look into research. We had a lot of questions about traffic displacement, comes up a lot from concerned residents through to authorities about those kind of issues. So the research was centered around this question: do school streets cause traffic displacement that may affect road safety on surrounding roads? So we looked at 2 school streets in Birmingham, which they call car-free school streets. They now have 18 there. We had nothing to do with the delivery there. They were doing that themselves, and very well. We just looked at 2 school streets that they launched in their 3rd round of launches. They did them in 3 batches of 6. So we looked at traffic speed and volume data, video footage, and postal survey to look at that question. This is what one of them looked like. So they put in signage, showcasing that it's a school street, and they used what I call kiddie cones, but I think there's various description, but child height cones, just to kind of indicate there's a school closure. Since we've done the research, they're actually looking at getting barriers in the road or signage, so it has changed a bit. As part of this whole research, we came out with 2 bits that you can go off and have a look up afterwards. There's a technical report that goes through all the detail that I'm going to go through, and a practitioner's guide, which is aimed at local authorities but can be read by anyone, about best practice for school streets based on our experience. That's what I put together. That was my thing. But the research itself, these were the 2 school streets we looked at. So the one on the left, Somerville, was a dead-end road, and Hillstone on the right was a 2-point closure. So it was kind of a through road on this residential estate. The purple roads were the surrounding roads where we were looking at the possible displacement. And then we had a control site in red, which is north on both of those maps there. So the research found, in summary, that there was no significant traffic displacement to surrounding streets. There was some, which I'll go into. The schemes didn't create road safety risks that can't be mitigated, and local residents agreed their streets were safe, and safer than what it was pre-implementation. So we took data before, during and after, and there's a summary of the findings and best practice in both the guidances. And we found a lot of positive comments as well from the head teachers and the council staff and parents and all sorts. That's just one quote there which we picked out on. So to go into a bit of detail, research and everything isn't quite my side, so I'll do my best to try and go through these words and stuff. So there were some indications of traffic displacement. So on the map we've got the school street highlighted in green. So on the surrounding roads to the west of the school street, you can see that there was a reduction in traffic, but just north we did find there was an increase. So there was a bit of displacement there. There was also an increase in informally parked cars, so kind of those on grass verges, so especially on that road to the north of the school streets, and that could create potential risk of worse road safety. So using the video footage, there were we looked at instances where road users, whether that was cyclists, pedestrians crossing, or vehicles that might have had a close collision or not, but the ones that were observed were low risk, that they had enough time to stop themselves before it became a higher risk, i.e. a collision. So it was nothing too serious to report back on, but there was a slight increase. So this is at Somerville, the dead end road. The closure is where road C is. This is a T-junction looking out from the school street. The video cameras found that there was a lower percentage of pedestrians having to wait before crossing. So it was much easier to cross at points B, C and D because of the school street. So it makes that journeys that bit easier and quicker so everyone could get to school on time. But on parallel roads to the school street, so parallel to C, they did have to increase those suggestions that there could have been traffic going to the nearby roads instead, causing pedestrians to have a slightly longer journey. Traffic speeds, so back at Hillstone, the through road, so all the roads that were observed at both streets were 30-mile-per-hour limits, but there was a significant rise in traffic speed here. Statistically significant reductions in traffic speed on neighbouring roads. So surrounding roads all decreased, but there was an increase on that school street. It's potentially because there are less cars. If you're removing that parent traffic, as we saw in the slide before, we saw a lot less vehicles in that space. It means that potentially residents who suddenly have a clear road to go down might be able to go that bit faster. So that's what that might be because of. Even so, the traffic speeds that were observed across the roads were all within the speed limits, most of them being kind of high teens, that kind of around 19. There was only a few that were observed a bit higher than that. And in terms of perceptions of surveys that were sent out, there was a big, strong support for school streets. I mean, generally there is an overwhelming kind of support for school streets at most sites that we support. And there's a rise of people who thought that the school road and surrounding roads were safe and safer than when before implemented. And parents and teachers in particular perceived that the school entrance was easy and safe to access, but there was a low number of those responses. And this is just a nice quote from the caretaker at Hillstone. It's lovely to, I get to meet lovely parents and get to meet all the lovely children, and it's a nice part of the day. And if you haven't been to a school street, it really is just doing a before and after. It's amazing, just seeing that calm presence. So yeah, if you just look up traffic displacement Sustrans, there's 2 places where you can download the reports and read more, or find me on Twitter at Sustrans Jenny for all things school streets.
Sorry, just couldn't get the button off mute there. Thank you, Jenny. And so I think what we'll do is we'll just run straight into Ali, and then if people want to ask their questions at the end, or is there anything burning anyone wants to come in on there? Leo, I saw you had your hand up. Or should we wait?
That's just a clap. That's just a clap. I'm just trying to use the react.
Love it. Yeah, sorry.
Oh, also on the thinking about the map you shared, I'm working on a massive database of all the school streets we've been involved with. We've definitely been involved with over 500, but we're looking to have that public at some point. So that will be available and make sure I get shared around. So it's exciting to see other maps popping up of school streets in the UK.
Thanks, Jenny. So yeah, let's hear from Ali, and then we'll do questions and everything after that.
Cool. I'm going to try and share my screen, but we'll see how it goes because I've never tried this on Zoom before. Oh, it's just gotten rid of you all.
It's looking good so far. Yes.
Can you see that okay?
Yeah, perfect.
Well, cool. Thank you very much, Jenny. So for the road safety presentation, I'm Ali. I'm also at Sustrans and work sort of alongside Jenny. I am a school streets officer based in Newcastle, and I've been with Sustrans since December, so still relatively new, but hopefully I can show you that we've managed to squeeze a lot into 9 months. So some of you won't know Newcastle, obviously, and definitely won't know how we do our school streets. Our scheme works a bit differently to the ones that you might be used to, especially if you are London based. So in Newcastle, before Sustrans got involved, as in like we were commissioned to do behaviour change and engagement work around school streets, it was decided that they would trial a signage only scheme. So the argument for this being that the council at the time didn't have the power to enforce school streets using ANPR, and the cameras could be really costly to install and to maintain. The steward schemes, which can be amazing, rely on volunteers if you're not paying staff, which is obviously a cost in itself, which puts the onus on schools for recruiting, training and managing volunteers, or that falls to other volunteer parents and carers, which isn't practical at every school, and it can be difficult to sustain in the long term. And again, with barriers or signs, I know a lot of people on this call would prefer barriers. They need to be put out and taken away, a lot of them, which increases the demands on school staff who are already very stretched, especially at peak school drop-off and pick-up times, and they can be sort of unsustainable. There are some schools where, you know, people start to forget to put things out and take them away, and it just stops being a school street, essentially. I know there'll be people who like agree and disagree with some of those arguments. I'm not sure I agree with all of them, but that's just a little bit of background. So yeah, we are a signage only scheme. You can see an example of the signage used just on the right there. So there are no people there are no barriers in the road, it's just those signs. And we are currently trialling this at 2 schools, but we've got plans to roll it out at a load more schools across the city in this academic year. In terms of monitoring, so we are doing monitoring for them at the moment, given it's a trial and given not many other places have tried signage only schemes. So we have a street systems camera. If any of you know Tom Bailey, we're using one of his cameras to monitor one of those school streets, and we are monitoring traffic with pneumatic tubes in and around the schemes. And then in terms of permits and exemptions, this is the bit that catches people out and they're a bit shocked by. So there are permits you can see on the sign for the zone, which is SCH3 in this case. So that's for residents and for staff at the school and visitors to the school, but also in this particular instance, the community centre that's in the closure zone. But there are other exemptions which, prepare yourself, are quite extensive. I don't know how standard this is. You know, some of it is like the emergency services stuff, obviously, blue badge holders, obviously, but there are exemptions for businesses, for taxis, various kinds of work. I won't dwell on that too long, but quite a lot of exemptions, which can cause some problems. The case study that I'm going to quickly chat you through today is at Hotspur Primary, which is a lovely, lovely school, sort of towards the east of the city, but just a little bit of the city centre. And you can see when we say school street, this one actually ended up being a closure zone rather than one street. So that's just something to bear in mind. And I do have a video, but I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to share it, but I'll share it at the end because it is, it's the video that this left-hand picture was taken from. And it is quite shocking because you can see some children trying to cross between those cars and stuff. I don't know if you can tell at the bottom, all of that on the right-hand side is parking for residents. So it's parking bays, but they're in places, the school traffic itself is too deep. So it's essentially triple parked right across that road. That is a 2-way street. Obviously, no one's getting the other way up it. And just on the left-hand side, there are barriers which sort of keep the children away from the traffic, essentially. So because it was, or is, a signage-only scheme, we knew we were going to have to go hard with delivery and behaviour change and engagement and all that. So we did a lot of it in the run-up to the launch of the scheme, particularly because it was the first in the city. We knew there wasn't going to be anyone or anything physically stopping people using the streets, so we needed to make sure that everyone knew about it, starting with the children, and then that way it started filtering through to parents, and then we did.
Oh. Anyone know what happened there?
Put a penny in the meter.
Yeah, looks like it. Poor old Ali. Well, hopefully she'll come back. And in the meantime, did anyone have any questions they wanted to raise? I might ask Jenny. Jenny, are you here?
I'm still here.
Yeah, hopefully Ali will find her way back. And if Sally is on and can let her in from the waiting room, because I can't see that, I don't think. Is Jenny, Ali was talking there about it being a sign-only scheme, and a bit of chat about, you know, some people saying, you know, we really support cameras, and I know you've got experience of different types of enforcement that include, you know, the spectrum. What's your take on that and the types of things that can be used?
Ali's computer just reset. That's why she got kicked out. Every space is different. So my project I did in Southampton, where we had bollards, that wouldn't be suited for all areas because there's no residents there's no residential access needed within the space we close. So that's not a suitable solution for everywhere. I think we've got 2 in Southampton now, but there's very limited other schools where we could implement that just because of how it's situated. AMPR, which is what everyone outside of London, well, in England, are now kind of looking towards. It has its pros and cons. I think, as Ali kind of mentioned, they're expensive, 20 to 30,000 just to implement one. But I know there are ways you could move it between sites, which could be a way around just having 1 or 2. And it's a lot if a council haven't had that set up before. It can be quite admin intensive, and where does that responsibility lie within the council? Is that going to be with your transport team, your schools team, or is that going to land with parking, who may not be happy if they haven't been involved before? Because you don't always involve parking in a school street scheme. They're suddenly being told they have to pick that up, and they may not have the resources to do it. So you've got to kind of tread carefully around that. But having a volunteer scheme, even just a term trial is enough to kind of test the waters. I mean, what I didn't say in my presentation is the longer you implement something, it's like habits, you know, it takes a while for habits to form. So it's having as long as possible to monitor that, if you can monitor it and get that feedback. People get used to it. We had a scheme where they were running out of parent volunteers. So they put out an email through the school saying, we don't have anyone, so we're going to have to cancel doing the school street. It won't run from next week. Suddenly they had loads of parents getting in contact saying, hey, we want this to continue, I can offer. And it's now just all parents that are involved. There's no school staff going out, which is quite a rarity. And that's the problem with stewards, is that sustainability of them, because you get steward fatigue.
And when Ali was talking about a sign-only scheme, is there any enforcement? Is it just down to police to turn up now and again, or what's the enforcement? Just the sign?
Yeah, sign and police. And then if the council have AMPR powers, I guess a camera car, if you've got one of those. At the moment, I think camera cars can only do the zigzags, I believe, if there's a car parked on zigzags. I don't know about PCSOs, actually. I don't know what power they have, but yeah, you'd have to get the police involved, and police are busy these days and under-resourced, so it's not always. I think with Birmingham, occasionally they had to call in the police when it got quite bad, and as and when they could, it did make a difference to parents behaving properly when the presence was there. And I've definitely seen it where they've got parking wardens about at one school street. Suddenly the parents didn't park inappropriately. They were a bit more sensible when they saw the people in their uniform hanging around.
So the change in moving traffic offences outside London was a change in if Rafe Smythe was here, he'd point out that it's actually 2 changes. One is allowing councils to enforce moving traffic offences. The other is allowing them to enforce them by cameras. So in those places that have got the powers, they can enforce moving traffic without a camera. So the council could have wardens in those few councils that have got it without a camera, as well as the police. The camera is just a technical way of being able to be there all the time.
That is a really good point, Mark. Thank you for that clarification. Okay, let's swing back to Ali.
Yeah, so we knew we'd have to start with behaviour change, engagement, things like that, starting with the children, filtering through to parents and carers, and the council handled the resident side of things. So we were based purely in the school. Just at Hotspur, so this particular school, we made about 3,500 contacts with children across all these activities, and then about 450 individual contacts with parents and contacts with every member of staff at the school, and obviously most of them multiple times. So there's all sorts of stuff that we did. I won't bore you with it all, but it was pretty fun, and a lot of it was child-led, which is like a lot of our education and young people stuff at Sustrans. So like the Eco Warrior session was a chance for children who are interested in the environment and things like that to tell us about spaces that they use, how they use them, what they wanted from them, what they wanted access to, things like that. And again, we were trying to be as child-led as possible within sort of, you know, council restrictions. So we asked the children how they would most like to travel, and they told us that they overwhelmingly wanted to travel actively to school. We asked them how they felt about their journeys to school, whether they would feel safe walking or cycling, whether they enjoy themselves, whether they think there are too many cars, which might have been a bit leading, but oh well. Whether they get to spend time with their friends, so you know, measuring the social interactions that they have on their way to school. And we did also ask them about independent mobility as well, but that didn't fit on the slide. And we did a big street survey so that they could tell us how they felt about the area around school and things like that. Sorry, I'm trying to race through this now that I've been kicked off. And yeah, the result of everything that we worked on, it seemed like it works pretty well. The vast majority of respondents on Commonplace want it to be made permanent. Apparently this is the most positive response they've had to a traffic scheme, which is lovely. But you can see in the themes to the free text responses, while a lot of people are like happy about say improved safety on the street, they were all positive, those safety comments. A fair number of people were worried about how the scheme is enforced and how it would be enforced in the future. You can see that bikes make up a bigger proportion of the traffic that use that. This is the street directly outside of the school. So the proportion of the traffic that is cars has been reduced and the proportion that bikes has increased. And according to their Commonplace, the scheme seemed to score pretty well across people's feedback. But these are the results that I'm most bothered about. So in this top left-hand corner, that was the key stage 1 cycle and scooter storage before the scheme started. In the middle, that is day 1, and at the bottom, that was day 4. So as you know, as the children got used to it and it felt a bit safer, more and more of them were coming in by bike and scooter and things like that. And you can see just in the middle here, while there are still cars, and I know in an ideal world we wouldn't want any cars, and especially not that horrible pavement parking, it is clearer, it is safer for the children. The junctions, it's far easier for the children to see across when they're travelling. And on the right hand side, that's the key stage 2 cycle and scooter storage, which I don't have before photos of because the school did show me around when we started, because there were no bikes or scooters there. They've had to, it's technically always been used for bike and scooter storage, but there was nothing there to show me when I first visited. So it's nice to see that the children are travelling more actively and feeling safer. It's a quick little bit of feedback from someone, an anonymous commenter on Commonplace, saying the experience outside of school is much calmer, safer and fun, which is exactly what we wanted. It feels more like the right environment for children. Again, exactly what we wanted. There are still problems with parking in the area, especially given there are a lot of exemptions and a lot of people have permits, but they're much better than they were. But yeah, I guessed that people would want to talk about the issues with it. Obviously, enforcement's an issue, and it's an issue that parents and residents have been bringing up. As we get further from launch day, we launched this just before the summer term. And when the children came back after the summer holidays, we did have issues with fewer motorists adhering to the rules. For some, it was confusion, and for some, it was just that they were bored and the novelty had worn off. So we know that, the council, who are now responsible for the scheme, need to up the enforcement, whether that is applying for those new enforcement powers, allowing that camera to be used for enforcement, the camera that's already there monitoring, having a bigger police presence. So we have had PCSOs down, they've not ticketed anyone or anything, but just as a presence, making people aware of the scheme and what could happen if they continue to ignore the rules. That, you know, maybe we need to go stronger on that. The signage needs to be clearer to motorists. So you can see on the right hand side at the top, that was the second school that we launched. At Hotspur, we knew that people weren't looking up to see the signage where it apparently legally needs to be. It's just too high for motorists to clock it easily. So we introduced these signs, which were, the drawings on them were done by the children, and the wording and stuff was designed by the children. That is at eye level for motorists. So it sort of, the idea is that it helps them clock the legal signage above it a bit easier, but there are other options. Such as the small little figurine type things in the bottom right hand corner. We still have problems with pavement parking, as I'm sure everybody does, because there are so many exemptions and because of the permits. It's not something that's completely gone away because we've not been able to completely exclude motor traffic from that area. It's something that, you know, all local authorities are struggling with, but it's something that we need to tackle if this is going to be a success. And yeah, if more school streets across Newcastle with this model are going to be a success, we need to do more monitoring. But I think the key thing is more enforcement. And then the last slide that I've got is a cheeky little shout out, because we are moving into more schools across the city. We're currently hiring for 2 new school streets officers in Newcastle, but also 1 in Sefton, if anyone happens to be in that neck of the woods. We do all sorts of stuff as school streets officers. On the left hand side, I've been here like just over 9 months, and that's just a glimpse of all the stuff that I get to do in my role. So yeah, sorry for sneaking a cheeky little shout out in there. But if anyone is interested in being a school streets officer or knows anyone who might be, I would highly recommend it, and they are more than welcome to get in touch for a chat about the role. And I can pop the link for those vacancies in the chat as well. But yeah, thank you very much for letting me share that.
Thank you, Ali, and great piece of technical save. Great technical save there. I will. Do you want to come in now, Mark, and make the point that you wanted to make earlier? And in the meantime, I'll ask people to think if there are any other questions you want to, please raise your hand in the thing or in person. And we've also got Cheryl Ford Lyddon from Modeshift, and so I have got a couple of questions I wanted to bring Cheryl in for, but let's see what we've got for Jenny and Ali at this point. But over to you first, Mark.
Well, we're working with Lambeth on the school streets, and they're turning it completely the other way around. And people have said about defaults. So they've started from the position of, we've got 70 odd schools in Lambeth which haven't got school streets. Which ones can practically work? And then we've triaged and gone from that down to the school street. And their attitude is it's a traffic management situation. It should be done, and there are practical reasons why it might be difficult in some locations. And let's see what can be done at so many schools. So that's the point I was making to Simon. We're down to about 30, which I can't really tell you where they are, but down to about 30. But there are practical reasons. You know, there is one school, for example, on Clapham Common South Side, which is the A3 or A24 or A3, but it's a traffic transport for London Road. It's a main road. Unfortunately, that school is on that main road, and no one is going to agree to close that for an hour a day in, at peak hours. So that's just the way it is. There'll have to be other things, although Hackney, of course, closed Church Street. So it can be done, but it takes a very brave council to close schools in those sort of circumstances. And so, as I said, we've gone through. The problem comes, and one question I wanted to ask about Sustrans experience is, you've got places where you have 2 schools next door to each other, or one school we've got has 4 separate entrances on different sides and different roads which aren't connected, as a reception in year 1, a year 2 and year 3, a year 4 and a 5, and a year 6 entrance. And when we said to the school, well, how about consolidating those entrances to make the school street easier? They said, well, no, that's up to us. We do that for school education purposes. It makes the school street a right pain to try and sort out, or impossible to sort out. And there are all sorts of, so there are some schools that are really easy, and they have one entrance, and it's one place, and it's a nice short piece of road, and it's really simple to do. And then there are others that are really problematic and actually are more like mini LTNs than school streets. And I just think that's one issue that I think would be good to get some advice on. And the other one is the one about staffing. And Lambeth have taken the decision that they don't want parents doing it because they think that puts an undue safety risk at parents from aggressive drivers who might do things with their cars or other weapons and take it out. And they think from an insurance and health and safety perspective, they can't afford to put parents in the firing line, or literally possibly of a risk. So they've pulled out of doing that. And I just wondered whether anyone else, that's their legal department saying, we just can't do that. I just wondered if anyone else had felt that, or maybe drivers are more aggressive in Lambeth. I don't know, but it'd be good to get some views on that. There are lots of other things, and I would just say one last thing is we, as part of this, we put air quality monitors at all these potential schools doing hourly air quality monitoring, because obviously with the school street, the air quality would go up for an hour. So if you do daily air quality counts, it's irrelevant. And they're all part of a network called Airly, A-I-R-L-Y, and you can see all their monitors and lots of other monitors around Europe on good versions.
There, Mark.
I've stopped.
Yeah, thank you. Some good points and a question back. So does anyone else have a question on this topic or a experience you'd like to share?
As part of Sustrans, we've done steward training to local authorities, parents, teachers that might get involved in stewarding, and we do a section on difficult situations to help kind of support them. Generally, it's very low chance that someone is aggressive. I say that outside of London. I know there are colleagues in London that have had situations arise. Actually, and in the Midlands as well, we've had an incident, but it is generally low when it comes to that. So it's reassuring those that are volunteering their time that generally it doesn't happen, and it's normally because the person who is aggressive has got outside the wrong side of bed, or they didn't know it's happening for whatever reason, and it's just a new routine. So yeah, we make sure that's part of it, so people feel confident enough with it, and not to put themselves in danger. We do kind of, if there is a point where they don't want to do it, then just to let whoever's leading on it know.
Yeah, and on the multiple points of entry, so for Hotspur, that first school that I launched, they have at minimum 3 points, sometimes 4, depending on who's going in that day. Yeah, and the council solution was to close them all, and I think that's the right one. It worked pretty well. We also have schools that are going through the process now, where we have up to 4 schools on either the same site or at least share a road, and there are ways around them. I think the hardest bit, and Cheryl was doing road safety stuff at Newcastle and working with all the schools before me, so maybe she can shoot me down. I think the hardest bit is getting all the schools to talk to each other and agree to something, because the schools have such vastly different priorities, I think, especially where they're sharing site by virtue of being the same school but across different age brackets. So trying to get a high school and a nursery to agree on priorities for the children that attend them, I find quite difficult, even though I imagine we all think that road safety should be a priority and active travel should be a priority, but trying to get them all to agree on that is quite tricky. Can I be really cheeky and pick something up from the chat?
Can you do that in the chat? Because at this point I want to bring in Cheryl, because she's joined us. So and you just made the perfect segue. So would you be able to answer that in the chat, Ali? And I will ask Cheryl to come in on that point about yeah, I mean, I guess Modeshift is there to do the stuff that isn't infrastructure and school streets, but and they have had more funding. But yeah, do you want to pick up there, Cheryl, and just give a little
Certainly.
Yeah.
So at Modeshift, we've been successful in securing the DFT grant, and that is for our Active Travel Ambassador programme. So the target of Active Ambassador programme, ATA for short, is secondary schools. So the idea is to encourage secondary school pupils to develop their own campaigns about sustainable transport, road safety, travelling safely, securely and sustainably in the longer term. And it's very much grassroots led by the students. I've got 5 ATA officers who work across the country, and they go into schools to deliver a 6-part programme which accumulates in an event, a campaign, which is developed by the students for the students. So it's very much peer-led, and the focus being on, as I say, sustainable transport, road safety, but it's what they want. So it's what they want to see, what their outcomes are. And obviously from a Modeshift perspective, we are all about sustainable and active travel. So that's what we're kind of guiding them towards without pushing a particular agenda on them. So I think it fits in very well with the work that's been going on with School Streets, with our partners, with Living Streets, with Sustrans, and certainly what's going on in schools at the moment. And we've had a really good uptake so far. And there's been a bit of a pause, obviously, with Her Majesty's passing, but we've got back to work now. And we've reached, I think we've got about 26 schools engaged already, and it's only the beginning of term. So it's a good programme, and we're very excited to be delivering that soon.
And the way it works in Manchester is that basically Manchester have done a deal with Modeshift, so any school can access Modeshift.
Yeah,
is that the case for every council, or are there different providers and councils can access different Modeshifts?
Every school in the country is registered free on Modeshift sites, so every school can use Modeshift for free. Whether the individual local authorities then buy a licence so that they can then access it to help schools, that's their decision whether they do that. But we've got a lot of, the majority of local authorities are engaged with us at some level, and we've got a lot of local authorities who have licences, so that's open to them as well. And we let them know about us and what we do and how we can help and support them.
And is the funding that you've got, I mean, or indeed your role, I mean, what we know is that schools have really taken a hit during COVID, didn't we?
Yeah.
So just having the headspace to do anything other than teach kids and make them safe has sort of been difficult. So is that something, the funding is, your new staff can bridge that gap? Again, that's something I think is a big issue. Schools haven't got the capacity to engage with the topic.
That's what we find, and particularly with secondary schools who are really challenging to engage. I think most of us who've worked with schools will know secondary schools, the curriculum is so tight that to actually get in there, and the teachers have such pressures on their time and their resource that they actually need an external supply, an external resource to come in, and that's what we can offer. And it ties in with so much. I mean, it's citizenship and it's active travel, and it's independent. It's promoting so much for young people, and that's why we've got this grant, and that's why we're doing this delivery.
Thank you. So we've got a couple of minutes left before we go, and there's been some great points made in the chat. So I don't know if anyone just feels the desire to pick up on any particular point, or whether we are happy to leave it there. Smiley face from Mark.
I was responding to Elizabeth.
Sorry, who came in then?
I was responding to Elizabeth. That's the smiley face.
Before you, someone else spoke.
That might have been me jumping in.
Jenny.
It was a point that Ali was going to raise, and she's replied to it in the comments about if parents can drive to school, they will do, and telling them nicely has zero effect. I think that highlights it's the importance of doing that behaviour change in schools and telling them the options, because they're just in routine. A lot of people just in routine, so being able to show them what you can do and having those conversations, and like she says, those cycle trainings, like showing them safer routes and being able to do something, being active about it. If you just put in a school streets, fine, but unless you're actually in the school working with them, saying, hey, this is what you can do now, rather than just moan about it, why you try and be part of it. So yeah, it's just thought I'd highlight that.
Okay, thanks, Jenny. Well, I can't see any other hands up. Tim, you're on mute.
Yeah, just so you could say that. I wonder if it's a bit about people have forgotten what distances are. I was in Corby yesterday and my meeting finished and I had to walk to the station to get the train to London. And I thought I've done this before, I'll be all right. So I did it, and I was okay. It was no problem at all. It took me about 20 minutes. And then my travel app told me I'd walked over 2 miles to get there. And I thought, if I'd had that information before I set off, I might have called a cab, because 2 miles is a long way. But actually, it wasn't. It was no problem at all. So I do wonder whether that's, yeah, I know, Ian, maybe I got the timings wrong, but yeah, I do think people forget how easy it is to travel those distances if you're able-bodied, which I claim to be. Anyway, I've really enjoyed today. Thank you.
Thanks to Jenny and Ali, and thanks to Cheryl, and thanks to everyone who joined, and see anyone who's able to make it next week.